lecture. As you're all aware, this center has been in operation for more than 3 years with the objective of connecting and understanding our Roma brothers and sisters across the world. This is a unique center set up with the support of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations. And since we all know that the Indian connection of the Romas is very well established, that they originated from here, but still there isn't much awareness about that connection, historical connection in Indian population also. So this center, other than connecting with the Roma brothers and sisters and to understand them, is also aimed to create awareness about this historical connection among the Indians, academic scholars, and the political setup and the governmental setup. We are happy that we have been able to achieve part of that objective. As I had mentioned in our previous monthly lectures, that government of India is already working on construction of the memorial for Roma brothers and sisters in the city of Kannauj, which will be completed in few months' time, which is a very good achievement in a sense that that will really mark a permanent thing to say the historical connection between our brothers and sisters Roma community abroad and India. And this will have all the markings of the Roma's attachment to India, their the wheel and other things. This monthly lecture we started almost 2.5 years back. This is the 29th in that series. The idea was to look at issues which are specific to a country or or some traditions or some issues which people may not have that much of awareness. So we have had these monthly lectures covering various countries like Romas in Bulgaria, Romas in Turkey, Romas in Slovenia, and other places, and on issues. And today's issue is very important. I would call it an important in that sense that people know about the Holocaust and the sufferings of the Jews, but not many people are aware of the Roma Holocaust. Even the Europeans took a long time to accept and recognize the sufferings and the killings suffered by the Roma community during this Second World War. It, as I was seeing in reports that it was in only 1982 when German Chancellor publicly recognized, the German government recognized this Roma genocide. And it took European Parliament, if I'm not correct, somewhere in 2015, when they said that yes, they agreed to declare 2nd August as the day for Roma Holocaust Memorial, which is organized. Events are organized on that day in various parts of the world, and we are happy to inform you that Antarashtriya Sahyog Parishad and our center every year has an event on that day.
Sir, kindly unmute yourself. Rajesh sir. Rajesh sir, kindly unmute yourself. Rajesh sir, kindly unmute yourself.
Should I repeat what I've been saying?
Yeah. Last minute almost.
So to I don't know. So now we are very lucky to have an eminent academician and a scholar from Roma community who has been a guest lecturer at the U.S. State Foreign Service Institute, as well has been giving lectures in various institutions and universities, which include Harvard, Columbia, MIT, and many more. So it is our pleasure and to welcome him on to speak to us on a topic which I mentioned is that is lesson learned from Roma Holocaust and a way forward. So now I'll request our Secretary General of Antarashtriya Sahyog Parishad to deliver the welcome address. The floor is yours, Shyamji.
Right. Thank you, Rajesh ji. I express my regret that I am on the road moving, but I'll continue to talk without video. And I welcome you all on the behalf of Antarashtriya Sahyog Parishad, Indian Council for International Cooperation. This institution has been working with Indian diaspora for more than 50 years now, with a single focus on the pre-independence Indian migration for first 40 years, and since last 10 years, it's the non-resident Indians also, the post-independence migration. And we have been successfully interacting with them, culturally, socially connecting the Indian diaspora with India. And since last 7 years, we also started interacting with the Roma community spread across Europe and other parts of the world. What my friend Rajesh ji has just expressed, that a memorial, Roma memorial in the largest state of India, the Uttar Pradesh, is under construction, and this will bring the Roma migration to the table for discussing, understanding, studying, and research. Because though there are volumes of books written on Roma issues in other countries, there is very little produced in India. Unless and until the academicians and the government of India recognize this migration, which is huge and spread across centuries, this will not be part of Indian psyche. And unless and until the common Indian understands that the Roma migration has happened, while Romas also get to connect with their mother country that they call, or the Barothan they call. They respect, they love Mother India, and with this memorial, this connection will be stronger, though this is only one part of the country from where migration happened 1,000 years back. And we held a Millennium Conference in 2018 and took the Roma delegates to Lucknow, the capital of the state of Uttar Pradesh, and also Kannauj. And that ignited the very idea of a Roma migration from Uttar Pradesh. So that's happening now. And as Rajeshji has said, there are general elections in next couple of months, and soon after the elections, we might be in a position to inaugurate that. There had been migration from other parts, other states of India, and we'll come to that later. Today's I welcome our distinguished guest speaker, Jud Nirenberg, who is a renowned academician and speaks about Roma issues in the best of the universities and academics in United States of America. So we'll have a great time listening to Mr. Jud, and I welcome him, and I thank everybody that they are participating in these lectures 2.5 years without a fail, without a break. This has been continuing every month. We have a lecture from a prominent guest. So I thank them all, and I thank even today's speaker for being with us and sparing his time. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you, Shyamji. Now I will request Jamir, Senior Research Assistant of this Roma Center, to introduce the speaker as well as the topic. Jamir, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, sir. And hello and welcome to all of you for joining this 29 virtual lecture of the lecture series with the focus on lesson learned about Holocaust and a way forward. Today, as our speaker, our chairperson of the center, Ambassador Rajesh Sachdeva sir, and our Secretary General, Shyam Parande sir, they talked about the center, how the centers are how the center is functioning. Center is functioning, and the Roma Memorial. So today the speaker is Jud Nirenberg, who is a Romani American and worked at the key position in Roma rights movement throughout Europe more than a decade. Jud is also the Vice President of National Roma Centrum based in North Macedonia, and he was Chief Executive Officer of the European Roma and Travelers Forum. That is one of the largest consortiums of Roma civil society in the world. As Jud has been the lecturer at the US Department, as well as the renowned and prestigious universities in the United States of America. And at present, Jud is a private consultant on refugee law for Roma and other clients seeking asylum in the United States of America, and consultant on international development organizations on impact assessment and donor relations. Jud publication is also very wide. His published works include Don Trollman and Romani Resistance to the Nazi, The Armed Resistance of a Soviet Roma, Gypsy Sexuality and Romani and Outsider Perspective on Intimacy and Gypsy Movements. He is the only author to receive a Romani American Community Bakht Award. That's one of the very prestigious awards for the Romani Americans. So today's lecture aims at addressing one of the most horrendous chapters in Romani history. Though this chapter has fallen through cracks, this chapter has been rejected and neglected by the historians and chroniclers and the authors and academicians. However, Roma community, this is the reason why the Roma community was lost to the history of the Holocaust until 2015, when the European Parliament, through a resolution, promulgated 2nd August as the annual European Roma Holocaust Memorial Day, and to commemorate and remember the genocide of around more than 500,000 of European Roma people, including women, children, old people. So for almost 4 decades, the German authorities and institutions denied, and even the Europeans and the Britishers historians denied the genocide of Roma community. There was a denial was the prominent amongst the intelligentsia in Europe till 80s. In 1982, the West German government recognized, finally, racially motivated massacre of Roma community. And in 2011, that's the milestone, especially addressing the issue of Roma Holocaust. In 2011, the Polish parliament officially adopted August 2nd as a day of commemoration for the Romani genocide. And the next year, the Croatian government and the other governments followed the suit. But that Holocaust was the precursors of the previous anti-Gypsyism and anti-Romani laws. Especially in 1926, the Bavaria, the state of Germany, initiated one of the first legislations against Roma that necessitated and required the registration of Romani people with the authorities in order to regulate their movement. And the same law was enacted throughout the country by the German government in 1929. And this legislation gave way to the number of draconian and searing legislations based on ideology of pure blood and German Aryan racial superiority. So the first mass genocide of Holocaust came about in January 1940 when around the 250 Romani children from Brno were killed in Buchenwald, and their dead bodies were used as a guinea pigs to test the efficacy of the Zyklon B cyanide gas crystals, the Zyklon B cyanide gas crystals, which were later put to use in the gas chambers, as some of the historians, Holocaust experts, pointed out. So that shows and that demonstrates how macabre and horrendous killing and massacre of these community, the people and the members of the Roma community on the ground of racial blood superiority. And on 16th of December 1942, that's the Heinrich Himmler, there's a signed the order. That's the person who was behind one of the persons who was behind the massacre of the Roma community during the Nazi era. So the Himmler also signed the order for sending German Sinti Roma to Auschwitz. And then the rest is the history. The gory massacre of Roma and Sinti culminated in 2nd of August 1944, when the Nazi German went on killing a spree across Gypsy Roma camp, Ziguner Lager, So at Auschwitz, Birkenau, a concentration camp where some agencies and institutions gave the numbers, even though the numbers of the killing of a Roma community in genocide is a very complicated and not easy subject. So unanimously accepted the number more than 500,000. So that there's a 2,897 Romani people were annihilated as a part of Hitler's genocidal plan. However, Roma genocide was masqueraded and less systematically pursued, and the lack of recognition of pogroms and genocide reflects the long-standing discrimination against Roma community in Europe. In recent years, awareness of Roma Holocaust started accelerating, and a Roma community across the world started observing 2nd August as a commemoration of Auschwitz Holocaust, and known in Romani language like Samudari Pen and Poraimos. Poraimos, some historians, some Roma scholars, they don't agree to using the word Poraimos, but the most frequently and the most accepted word or the maxim is the Samudari Pen, which is used frequently across Europe for denoting the Holocaust of Roma people. And they started paying tribute to the victims as well as testifying the strength of the survivors, besides making advocacy of Roma rights, social inclusions, and the improvement of the current economic situation of the community on the day of 2nd of August. Without delay, because we have the very prominent and expert speaker today with us, and it's our honor to have Jud Nirenberg, and he has he has overwhelming expertise at the subject. So we are excited to listening to him and some different findings. So thank you very much for your kind attention. And I would like to request our chairperson, Ambassador Rajesh Deva sir, to proceed the lecture. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Jamir, for the introduction. Now, what we are waiting for. So, this is the time to invite our speaker, Jud Nirenberg, to talk on the topic that is the lessons learned from Roma Holocaust and a way forward. The floor is yours, Mr. Jud.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for those who organized this, for inviting me. I know you've had several old friends and old colleagues of mine speak previously, and it's an honor to be again in their company. And thank you to everyone who's here today and took time to participate. My goal is not to speak too long and to leave a lot of time for questions or just group discussion. I've been introduced at length, but let me very quickly repeat a little bit about myself before I get into the content. As said, I'm living in the US and I'm American, although I lived somewhere between a quarter and a third of my life in Europe. So have sort of a foot in two places. I'm Romani American, or rather I'm half Romani American, which on this topic is worth noting because my other half is Jewish. So I'm quite aware of the sensitivities on both sides. Holocaust memory sometimes for Jewish organizations is they treat it as turf to protect. And I try to be understanding of why and think about how to push for more recognition of Roma without seeming competitive or seeming like we're taking something away in a zero-sum game. I'm flattered to be called an academic, but I'm really not. My background is less on the academic side and more on the political or activist side. I started after university working for the Roma political party that existed at that time in Czech Republic, as it was known at that time. And ended up directing the largest grant-making fund in Europe or anywhere supporting Roma NGOs, Roma political organizers, which was the Roma program supported by philanthropist George Soros. I worked at the OSCE under Nicolae Gheorghe, whose name would be familiar to some of you, even though this is many years ago. And with him drafted the first OSCE action plan for Roma and Sinti issues, which is still used, or rather not very well applied across Europe and North America today. As mentioned, I ran the European Roma Travelers Forum at a time when that organization was new, and at a time it was the biggest Roma organization in Europe. It was not it was a consortium of organizations, and it was the consortium with the most members. It theoretically still exists today, but it's a bit of a shell of itself. But I've held many roles in Roma organizations over the years. I eventually focused my activism time more on writing. I've written and co-written several books, and that's why I eventually found myself invited to give a lot of talks in academic settings. But I'm not an academic myself. I do not have a doctorate. I'm not a professional historian. I just sort of became one through research and writing. Or as we say in America, I'm not really a historian. I just play one on TV. But that said, and by the way, if someone wants a fuller bio, I'm happy to email one or message one. I have just shared in the chat box my contact information. if somebody would like to be in touch after today about anything at all. It was mentioned that these days a big part of what I do is legal consultation for people seeking asylum or refugee status in the US. I would be glad to share with all of you or with any of you a document which is an analysis of the situation Roma face today in Romania, which is something that has been used in a lot of courts to defend Roma who are undocumented in the US, who are from Romania, and who've entered the US illegally, and who are asking in court to be allowed to stay here. It's a bit of an unusual thing. When one thinks of asylum, one doesn't usually think of people fleeing the European Union. But I have had success helping a lot of Roma clients from Romania in particular to win asylum from the European Union here in the US. And if you're curious to see the analysis of Romania and how that court victory is achieved, I'm happy to share that document. It's very short. It's a couple pages. Anyway, on to the actual topic of the day. Excuse me, just 1 minute. I have some notes for myself. I was giving a talk years ago. I don't know, maybe 9-8 years ago at New York University. There was a conference on Roma issues, and I had a recent book, not one that we'll discuss today, but a book that was sort of a memoir of the Roma political movement in Europe and my participation in it from around 1990 to around 2005. I was talking about this book, and there was a non-Roma person in the audience who stood up to ask a question. And his question was, everyone here wants non-Roma to be more aware of Roma and to be more interested. But how can you make people interested in Roma and in Roma history when Roma history has, there have been no wars and you have had no heroes? So how do you get people interested in a story that has no heroism? I thought that question was flawed on multiple levels. And so it got me thinking a lot about not just how to answer that question for that man or the people in that room, but how to have a story out there that shows Roma heroism in history. Because of course Roma have fought on the front lines of every war in Europe, and pretty much every American war. And there have been many Roma heroes. It's bizarre to think that the only kind of hero is a soldier or someone who does something brave on a battlefield. But even if you think that, there have been plenty of Roma heroes. And in the context of war, there have been Roma heroes who were not soldiers. There have also been many partisans. There have been many activists, peace activists, anti-discrimination activists. There have been people who've been heroic in many ways in and outside of wars in Europe. And so the question was, well, how do I get some of those stories out? I've now written 2 books on Roma during fascism or Roma during World War II. And the intent of neither of those is to highlight what was done to the Roma, although you can't write these books without covering that question. But the question I want to address is, what did Roma do to fight back? How were Roma part of the victory over fascism, over Hitler, more important, over a certain mentality? So what have been some takeaways from both of these books? As I say, Roma have never had a country, and so Roma have never started a war or had an army of our own. But Roma have been in every European war as combatants, as spies, not only as victims. In World War II, Roma fought on both sides, and there are several examples of Roma fighting on both sides of the same battle. Roma have always wanted to show their patriotism in many different countries, and Roma have always been viewed as foreign and incapable of national loyalty. But history is full of Roma fighting and dying to prove their loyalty and winning medals of valor. Roma won medals of valor, both fighting for the Allies and fighting for Germany in World War I and in World War II. One of the things I aim to do when sharing narratives about specific Roma with readers is to dispel some myths and some stereotypes. The Trollman family, the first book I wrote in the book that most people are familiar with, is a book called Johann Trollman and Romani Resistance to Nazism. Johann Trollman, if you haven't looked at him or the book at all and don't know the story, Trollman very briefly became Germany's national light heavyweight boxing champion, and had his title taken away because he was not Aryan, because he was Roma, or rather Sinto. And instead of just focusing on winning fights after that, he really focused on using the boxing ring and his fame to do performance art inside the boxing ring and sort of stand up and say to the audience, am I white enough now? What would be white enough? When am I German enough? Excuse me, I have notes and I've lost my place on them. But Trollman, his family had lived for many generations in the same part of Germany, in the same city. They were very deeply rooted there. They were locals. However, they were Sinti who would probably look to outsiders who did not know them like nomads, because they did seasonal itinerant labor, because they owned a wagon, and in the summer they would travel for short-term work and they would sleep under the wagon or in the wagon. So getting to know the Trollman story and the reality of how that family was living before World War II is a nice way of showing people the difference between how they think of traditional Roma culture and how Roma were actually living. It's very common to hear people in Europe say, well, I don't know any Roma who are nomadic right now, but that's because we fixed that after World War II. But up until the 1940s, all the Roma in my country were Esmeralda. They were running around, singing and dancing and living with horses and wagons. That was always a tiny minority of Roma, the ones who were wandering, not because they were war refugees or economic migrants, but because they just wanted to do that. It was always a tiny fraction of Roma, and it was certainly a tiny fraction of Roma in the time between the two world wars. As I said, Trollman was not Roma, he was Sinto, and a book that shines light on the Sinti history reminds us of some things about fascism and about the genocides of the 20th century that are often forgotten or misunderstood. One hears people say all the time that the Germans almost succeeded. The Germans almost wiped out the Jews. The Germans almost wiped out the Roma. And thank God they didn't. Well, when we say that, we forget that the Germans in a great sense did succeed. No, they did not wipe out 100% of the Roma or 100% of the Jews, but they did completely wipe out some Roma and some Jewish cultures. Before the 1940s, the Sinti were not a German gypsy community. They were a pan-European gypsy culture. And other than the German and the Austrian Sinti culture is gone as a result of fascism. There isn't really Italian Sinto culture except for a couple of families. There isn't any Sinti culture in Bohemia, Slovakia. There used to be. There used to be Hungarian Sinti culture, and there's no such thing. You can't find anyone who can remember it personally and describe what that culture was. There are no survivors. It's like, it's true that the Jews of Europe survived, but really, the Holocaust succeeded. There is no more Ladino Jewish Europe. Thessaloniki was a Ladino-speaking city. There is no more Ladino-speaking Greece or Turkey. You could fit all these people in one room. And most of them live in Israel, not in Europe. There is an entire language, culture, and history that was eradicated. And when you talk about someone from Sinto history, you're reminded of that. Where did all of this go? There is no more Sinti Balkans. And there was. There was a Sinti culture and a Sinti dialect spoken in Slovenia, Croatia, places like that, and it's completely gone. A big part of the Trollman book is a look at how the genocide, how that history is remembered or not remembered today. And largely through interviews and oral history, I try to cover the controversies over inclusion of Roma in Holocaust education, in museum exhibits, in public sites, and so on. And I hope I've showed how much more complex this problem is than simply a good guy versus bad guy, coordinated, intentional exclusion. But it's partly about a well-organized, well-funded global network pushing for one agenda up against a much smaller, less capable network trying to engage. It's sort of a mouse and a lion, both somewhat interested in partnering with each other, but very suspicious. And frankly, mice and lions are not well designed to be equal partners. And so the history of Roma activists trying to engage with large billion-dollar Jewish-led history remembrance organizations is a very difficult history. Here's a very very often overlooked issue that the book addresses. I think this is probably the most important takeaway of the book for Roma activists. And I often run into activists who tell me they read the book, and I realized if they did, they skipped the most important chapter. There is a lot of research done in the US, in Canada, but especially in Europe, Western Europe, on what is achieved with Holocaust education. All of this research focuses on anti-Semitism, but anyway, let's think about this for a minute. There's lots and lots of research done to show what happens when young people are educated about the Holocaust. And if there's one thing that academics who've done this research have learned very clearly, it's that Holocaust education has, I do not exaggerate, zero impact, no measurable impact on anti-Semitic attitudes. Young people in Britain, France, Canada, wherever, do not have their stereotypes or negative feelings about Jews in any way lessened or shaped by education about the Holocaust, not whether it's reading in class, not whether it's a day trip to a museum. That is not a thing achieved by Holocaust education. Why not? We could spend hours on that topic. Let's not. But it's important to know that at least the way Holocaust education has always been done, from the 1950s up until this morning, has not served that purpose. And the Holocaust education that's been done benefits from things that we teaching about Roma history will never have. We will never have as many survivors giving their own testimonies of the camps as the Jews have had. It's too late. They're already dead. You're not going to interview them now. So we're never going to have this trove of written testimonies or video testimonies to compete with the large volume of well-articulated Holocaust remembrances that one has when one teaches about the Jewish Holocaust. We're never going to have the excellent firsthand books. We're never going to have an Anne Frank book. It's too late. You can't go back in time and find some Sinti girl who reads and writes well and sneak paper and pen in her hand so that she can write an equivalent of Anne Frank. We'll never have the money. Roma will never be working on teaching the Samudaripe with the kinds of billions of dollars or euros that the Jewish community has allocated to education about the Holocaust. So here we are trying to do something without the same resources that they had. And what did they achieve with all their resources? Nothing. So nothing in terms of fighting bias. So the question is, now that we know that, should we teach about the Samudaripe at all? And if we do it, why? The good news is I learned in interviews with Roma activists across Europe that there are some very good reasons why we should continue and increase our efforts. But we should know what we can achieve and what we cannot achieve. What we can achieve is education about Roma history for Roma. Roma young people can learn about our history, and it can help us to have self-respect. Great. Okay. Education on Roma history can be a way of bringing Roma together and building solidarity across countries, across continents, and across kinds of Roma who are not so culturally similar, not so dialectally similar, and who need to find some common ground. Bringing Roma and Sinti together historically has not been easy in our civil rights struggle. And working together on Holocaust memory can be very helpful in bridging that gap. So there's a lot that we can do by having a new Roma genocide exhibit or memorial site or education. But let's remember when we pick what to fight for, why we're doing it. If what we think we're doing is fighting to have the Hungarian people learn more facts about what happened to Roma under fascism, well, it's important to remember something. All this effort is not going to reduce anti-Gypsyism in Hungary. We'll have to do other things to win that battle. Anyway, for me, that is somehow the most important point. When we do this work, we should know what we're trying to achieve, and our tactics should be aligned with our goals. What else? My second book was a translation project, focusing on the work of a Russian historian, a real historian, not a fake one like me, Nikolai Besenov, who was a non-Roma, but whose family was mixed with Roma. Besenov did research on Roma in the Soviet military and showed the role that many Roma played in fighting Germany and in defeating Germany and in liberating countries in Eastern Europe, not just liberating the Soviet Union from the Germans, but also liberating other countries, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland. He has examples of Roma who went, even Berlin, Roma who went with the Soviet army and helped liberate all those places. In doing that work, I came across several things. There are examples of Roma everywhere in war, from guerrilla fighter to regular soldier to tank commander to engineer, people working in the Air Force, roles that the average person and the average Roma doesn't expect. And one thing Besenov shows is how majority society's racism has really seeped into the minds of Roma ourselves. And so Roma will, when they're asked about what the Roma did in World War II, they'll tell these legends. There are these stories that are passed down in families. Oh, do you know there was a Roma boy who stole something very important from Hitler? but they don't know the real stories. They only know these fantasy stories that conform with the stereotypes of the Roma thief, the Roma beggar. But you ask them if they know the stories of Roma who were on the front repairing damaged airplanes or doing really complicated mechanical work. No, they're not aware. They're not aware that their great uncle had a medal for valor for not for stealing something from Hitler, but rather using his university degree for the war. These stories get forgotten completely. One thing that doesn't come into view very much when we look at the history in Central Europe, but very much when we look at Soviet Roma history, is the interaction between Roma and other types of so-called gypsies. Because in the Soviet Union, you didn't only have Roma or Roma and Sinti, but you also had Luluri, all kinds of Central Asian ethnic groups that are a part of the Roma diaspora also, and also have roots in India. But they're not Romani language speakers, and the connection between Roma and those people is a little bit harder. And the complexity of finding common ground and respecting that we're not all the same, not pretending we are, but also looking for the commonality. It's really worth thinking about when you read the testimonies, or you read the memories of people who were in the war, and for the first time, these Roma soldiers met, for example, Luluri soldiers, and what were those interactions like? One thing that makes Soviet pre-war history very different from Central Europe is the nomadism. Contrary to stereotype, in Europe, there's a fantasy that the Roma were all nomads until very recently, until after World War II, until communism came along, whatever. But in fact, there were not that many Roma nomads as a result of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as a result of the Ottoman Empire. Pre-World War II, in the middle of Europe, there weren't that Roma wandering around in wagons. But when you get to the Soviet Union, it's very different. And in the early years of communism in the Soviet Union, many Roma are still traveling by choice or by tradition, at least. And so, the World War II plays a different part in the integration of Soviet Roma, because it's a moment when they have to give up the horse. Something that is very jarring, if you read this book, this translation of Besanov, something jarring for me as an American, and even as someone who grew up partly in Western Europe, is that a reader from Western Europe or North America has really grown up thinking of migration going in one direction. For us, no matter how enlightened we think we are, it's dug into our heads from a very young age that the East is archaic and the West is new. For Americans, we grow up thinking of Europe as the old world, capital O, capital W, and the US is the new world. We say it all the time as children. And even when we talk about American history, the West, California, is the future, and the East is archaic and stuck in European ways and biased, and the West is pragmatic and open-minded. The West is freedom of opportunity. We only think of migration going westward. And I've found that British and French and even Germans, we all tend to do that. We think of migration going from south to north and from east to west, and never in any other direction. And then when you look at the Soviet Union and you look at family histories, at oral histories, you discover all these Soviet Roma, all these Russian Roma, whose families were migrants in the late 1800s or in the early 20th century from the West, from the Southwest, of course. I'm talking about people whose families moved to Russia from Wallachia, from Romania, but also from other countries. And we're reminded that the great Roma post-slavery migration went in all directions. It went absolutely everywhere in the world. And we know so little about the Roma migration to Brazil, to Cuba, to Australia, to Argentina. We only think about Roma migration in certain directions. Besanov's work is very interesting because it is the writing of someone who believes very passionately in Roma. He loves us, he values us as people and as a culture, and he wants everyone in society to know and respect our history. And yet, his writing is full of some of the most awful stereotypes and nonsense about gypsies that you can find. My point is not to criticize this individual dead historian. My point is just to remember that just because someone likes Roma doesn't mean that they understand us or that they're free of bias or incorrect ideas about us. Besanov's old-fashioned bigotry towards non-Europeans, not just Roma, but Africans, Asians, it comes up all the time in his writing, accidentally. The last thing that I would mention quickly is Ukraine. My book includes something in the beginning and a chapter in the end about what's happening now with Roma in Ukraine as fighters and Roma from Ukraine as refugees, the kind of discrimination and mistreatment that Ukrainian Roma are facing everywhere as refugees and as fighters. At the same time that Ukrainian Roma men are fighting on the front in Ukraine, their families are being segregated and denied the same care as white refugees everywhere else in Europe. How are their efforts seen? How is their bravery on the front lines of battle being seen? It's being seen in caricature. You may have been exposed to the media story about the Roma who captured the Russian tank. Everybody read about it, but how did they read about it? They read about it with headlines and leads, making jokes about gypsies stealing being a good thing for once. Ukrainian Roma being interviewed about the war say again and again that finally Ukrainian Roma are able to prove to Ukrainian society that that we're real loyal Ukrainians and that we belong. And what they're forgetting is that Roma have been proving this on the battlefield over and over again. They proved it in World War II, they proved it in World War I, they proved it in the Crimean War, they keep proving it. There is simply no memory among white Ukrainians or white Russians about all this proof. And if you're not crazy, you realize that when this war is over, Ukrainians will also not remember that Roma fought for their country. They're not remembering it now, and they're not going to remember it 10 years from now. Not on the Russian side, not on the Ukrainian side. And the battle for equality and the battle against stereotypes will have to be fought somewhere else. And if you're American, this is not surprising to you because African Americans they also believed that their heroism in World War I, and then they believed their heroism in World War II was going to end segregation, and that is not what did the job. So having said all that, let me stop speaking at you and see if there's questions about what I've been saying or about my writing, if anyone's read it, or just if people want to discuss. Let's stop making it a monologue. Hello, Grattan.
Thank you very much, Jude. Now the floor is open for comments, questions. Thanks for an interesting presentation. And I just wanted to say whether the Roma themselves could have done something to talk about the heroism in various wars or various this thing. Didn't they try by themselves project it? The Roma
I'm not sure I
community
understand.
scholars.
Could you repeat the question?
I'm saying you said that Romas were involved in all the wars either in Europe or in Russia, there were scholars at that time who could be of Roma origin, and they tried to project such
There were very
heroism.
few. There were just, if you go back to the 1940s or before that, there were just very few Roma who were, there weren't a lot of Roma authors or scholars or intellectuals. There have never been as many as we have right now, but the history is not lost, and people can still research it. People can still write about it. It depends which war, but people are still writing today about 18th and 19th century history. And there's no reason that we can't still be writing about the history of Roma in those times. Besanov was able to find countless stories, too many stories, too many archival documents about Roma who won medals and Roma who fought in the front. And when I tried to research the Trollman book, there are just more stories that I could imagine, not just about Trollman, but Roma who were guerrillas in France, guerrillas in Belgium, Roma who were activists in Poland, Roma who did all these things. It's not impossible to produce a book on this topic. There could be many books on these topics.
Thank Yes, Gretchen, the floor is yours. Gretchen, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, yes, I made notes, Jud, as you talked, and so I'm just taking them in that order. I would like to mention Zilka Helt. She was one of the few Sintetices who escaped from Slovenia during the roundup in Slovenia and Croatia, in which, as you said, almost total extermination of Roma and Sinti in that region at the time. And it would be interesting to keep an eye on a historian who is working on that right now. That's Dunja Jakupovic, who belongs to Kali Sara in Zagreb, and I'm hoping to do some work with her. Also, everybody should know about the Holocaust event, the Roma Holocaust event that's taking place on the 31st of January in New York, bringing together, we hope, diplomatic personnel, including, we hope, the Indian ambassador. Just mention that. My own battle at the moment is around the preservation of the most important memorial to the Roma genocide, which is the Berlin Memorial, which is under threat from the German railways who want to have a tunnel go under it. And there are at the moment two camps, one who see the possibility of a compromise over this, and the others are the untouchables, those who will not allow anyone near the memorial. And this is going to work itself out over the next couple of years, I dare say. My other big battle in recent years has been with David Cameron, now back in government in the UK, because he created the UK Holocaust Commission, but over a period of 4 or 5 years would never allow Roma representation on that commission. And the wording on the memorial, as far as we know so far, mentions only Roma among the others. So there's a major battle going on there. Came to my mind also that speaking of our warriors, speaking of our fighters, those in the UK might not be well known, but Harry Smith and George Marriott were among soldiers in the British Army fighting in the rear guard at Dunkirk and suffered for it because they were taken prisoners. And George Marriott tells that he was in a camp which he believes was close to Auschwitz at the time. But although he was, well, it's a story I won't go into, but they did manage to survive anyhow. My own in-laws both served in the 19th Brigade, the Macedonian Partisan Brigade, It was mainly a brigade that was active within Macedonia and partly on the front against intrusion of Albanians into Macedonia. I see Susanna is here. She may want to add something to that. So I do endorse our difficulties, the imbalance between the Jewish commemoration of the Holocaust and our own commemoration being a battle between, as you say, perhaps an elephant and a mouse. And the fact that we've been often pushed aside, and I think it's a very regrettable situation, and we have to be very, very much alert to our right to say that it was only Jews and Roma who were set upon, who were subject to genocide because on racial grounds, perfectly on racial grounds, and that Roma and Sinti were some of the first prisoners into Dachau, for example. Finally, one little note at the end. Jud was referring to the perhaps lack of connection and lack of knowledge around South America. Well, we're hoping to put that right, because right now there is planning for the next World Romani Congress to take place in Brazil. And we hope that way to reunite ourselves across the hemispheres from north to south. That would be a thing of great significance. And for a while, we might get away from the rivalry and difficulties and entanglements that we have here in Europe. So that's my contributions. Thanks for giving me a bit of time.
May I ask a question, Rajesh ji?
Please go ahead, Punita ji.
Yeah. Hi, Jud. Thank you so much for telling us more about the Holocaust and well, all the trials and tribulations around that. My question is about reparations. And, this has been an ongoing dialogue for the Jewish Holocaust. And as recently as December 23, I think there was a news article about 1.4 billion compensation, dollars or euros, I'm forgetting which currency. So I'm just wondering, what is the situation with Roma reparations for the Holocaust?
I used to be involved in meetings that Roma activists had with the German and the Swiss government. I'll admit the last time I went to a meeting about that was more than 11 years ago. So I'm not a part of those discussions anymore. But let me point out a couple things about that topic. For the Germans and the Swiss, have been paying out to survivors, Roma and Sinti survivors of slavery in the camps for many years now. And for the German and Swiss government, reparations means two things. It means, and understand what it does not mean, what it has never meant to them. It has always meant giving money to a community, and it has always meant giving money to individual survivors. But now let me say what I mean by both of those things. A community does not mean that the government wants to give out money to Roma NGOs or Roma charitable projects. Giving to the community means, for example, funding a Roma memorial site in Berlin, or a Roma memorial museum exhibit, something that is for everyone. Just as a big part of reparations to the Jewish community has meant the establishment of a very, very large museum of Jewish history in Berlin. For the Germans and for the Swiss, funding this sort of thing is a kind of reparations, which makes it very different than how Americans understand the word reparations. Americans have been spending billions of dollars for many years now on African-American museum and sites and education. And we never consider that a part of the word reparations. We think of that's public education. That's not for African Americans. That's for my child to be able to access African American history. But the Germans and the Swiss, they'll count up all the money they've been spending on reparations because they've built memorial sites, they funded books, they funded museum exhibits, and so on. When it comes to individual reparations, they pay them, but they don't pay them to someone because your grandmother was in the Holocaust. They pay it to you because you personally went through something. So, of course, the number of people available today to receive such compensation goes down by the day. But there are people who receive money because as children, they were made to do slave labor in a camp like Birkenau. But understanding that means that for the Germans, well, this has been done. And being reminded that they need to do it, they kind of shrug and say, what do you mean we need to do it? We've been doing it. We've been doing it for years. Depending on how old the German is, he can't remember a time before they've been paying this money. Anyway, I'm not offering an opinion. I'm just giving a little bit of background on what compensation means to the Swiss and the Germans.
Yeah, Jud, interesting footnote on this. The Berlin Memorial, what the untouchables are saying, and I'm one of them, is that Germany ought to consider, irrespective of cost, a route that goes around our memorial and does not do any damage to what is regarded as sacred ground to not only survivors of the genocide, but victims of, I should say not survivors, but victims of both the genocide and the present day attacks upon Roma, the biggest of which, of course, has been Kosovo, where 130,000 Roma were brutally expelled from Kosovo, 14,000 homes destroyed, murders, disappearances, rapes took place. So that is sacred ground. And we say that Germany should take the opportunity, irrespective of cost, to do us a right turn that would be seen as part of a block reparations, if you like, or in the light of block reparations demands of the past, to go around our memorial at any cost that it may be, because at the moment it does look as if money comes into this factor. So that's my footnote.
Anyone else with any questions or comments?
Comment, if not a question.
Yeah, please.
I'm deeply troubled about what's happening in Gaza. And so what Jud was saying about absolutely zero lessons learned from the Holocaust education, one really does wonder about that, because if after undergoing such trauma, if the Jewish community has not, learned what it's like to be aggressed upon like this, I mean, what hope do we have? I mean, it's really distressing. So what kind of education can we impart where people actually learn a lesson and, this lest we forget thing is actually internalized and not repeated on whichever community in the world?
Yeah, and of course, I was not saying that Holocaust education did not teach the Jews anything. I meant that Holocaust education does not reduce anti-Semitic views in the majority population when they receive this education. But yeah, I'm not saying that education cannot reduce people's stereotypes or bigotry, but the way Holocaust education has been done, that has not been something it has achieved. And so it's really worth when we try to teach our own people, or when we try to teach bigger society about our history, what are we saying about it, and what impact do we think that will have, and why do we believe that it'll have that impact? Anti-Black racism has certainly gone down remarkably in the US and Canada, from the 1950s to today, but I don't think it's gone down because people have been taught about slavery or even about Jim Crow. History lessons are not what make the difference. And maybe the problem with Holocaust education is not that there isn't enough of it, but rather what isn't being taught. But I think it's important. Anyway, I really think that if we're teaching Roma history, we should worry less about what the majority knows about our history and more about what our young people know. Yes, we would like there to be more education about Roma history in the general curriculum. And of course, British people of Indian extraction would like the British children to learn more about the history of British colonialism in India. There are 1,000 different minority groups all saying that one page in the history book is not enough. We need a chapter. Unfortunately, if you have a chapter about the history of every minority group, the chapter won't be enough. And you're left with nothing but chapters about minority groups, and you don't know who Cromwell was. Our goal should not be that the average American in Iowa or the average British person in Liverpool has a good understanding of Roma history. We're not going to get there. But where can we get?
Yeah, Dhyama, I see you.
Yes,
The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I think it was very interesting to mention Gaza, and we should think that we never came back from a trauma. I was in Canada now. I could see the First Nation. We paid a lot of reparation. We recognized genocide. But if you see how the First Nation are still living such a hard condition, I mean, we never came back from a genocide. Anyway, how much you will pay, how much you will make reparation, it's the same about, I was writing a book about the slavery in Africa, and every time we talk about genocide, First Nation, it was 2,000 million, African people, 50 million, and we never come back on the trauma. When the trauma is there, after centuries, is not possible to bring back a right situation. And I think it's important that to see that we didn't learn nothing, because we live still a country being hurt by the trauma, and we just watch. And after we will make all kind of reparation, recognize the genocide, but that will be too late again. So I think it's important to know that the first thing to do is to make sure that you don't make any trauma to anyone. Thank you.
Sir, I have one comment on Jud's speech. Thank you very much, Jud, for your very insightful speech. As you mentioned, as Punita ji asked you the question about reparations, you know that why it is important, because the most effective way to destroy a people and erase their own understanding of their history. If you want to destroy any civilizations or any community, there is a chicanery and the deliberate subterfuge to lead the Roma community to the historical amnesia, the historical loss. So if, as you mentioned, that the reparation doesn't mean the financial and monetary, the monetary compensation in American sense. But here also that the most of the Roma people, they don't want money, euro and dollars. Still, there is the apathy of European powers to impart the educations and the sensitization of European general populations, as European Union Agency itself, European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. That's a survey 2021. It says that more than 48% European people, European general populations, they don't want Roma as their neighbors. So And still the 85% Roma people are lurching under the abysmal poverty. If you talk about the more than 48% Roma people are in material deprivation. I'm not saying that's the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights. That report says that's a very recent report. Discriminations, that is a common phenomena. The more than 46% Roma people, they are being discriminated every day, whether in private service or public service, whether they are looking for a job or they are at work. So they are being discriminated still today, the 2024. So that is the problem, that there is complete strategy to keep the Roma at the bay, at the lowest ebb of the society, so that they cannot raise their voices. And a lot of money by European Union for the integrations, education, information, sensitization in the European society, but that achieved. Still the situations, on all the human indicators, the Roma are at the lowest ebb. Despite the 2011, 2020, 2030, the European Union frameworks for the inclusions, and 2010 to 2020. So a lot of different European Union agencies and parliament and councils and initiatives. But at the end of the result is what? So I think that the education, that all the money, the European Union, that there is also the fault line with the European Union, because all the money sanctioned to the government. And what the government does, as you also mentioned, that they don't sanction the money to the NGOs or the Roma institutions or organizations. That is also one of the fault lines, because the Romani organizations, the governments, they become apathetic and phlegmatic about the Roma issues. You might have, you are aware of that. In Slovakia and Czech Republic, the European councils voted the fund for the development that the fund has been allocated for the Roma development, but that fund has been used on otherwise. That fund has been used otherwise on a different aspects of the society. So that fund, which are being allocated by the Europe international organization and institutions, that fund goes to that fund. That fund is of no avail for the Roma community. So it is very important to teach the Romani history to the Romani people. They should be aware of their Holocaust, their in slavery in Transylvania for 5 centuries. They should be aware of what the Roman Empire or the Holy Roman Church did for the Roma community. They should be educated, and they should be aware of their the past horrible and horrendous chapters in their life. So I think that that's my personal view, that the Roma that fund should not be in a monetary sense, but that fund should be used to educate the Roma about their history, about their socio-political situations in the past, in the present, so that they can come to the, they can come to the the mainstream of the society. They can be integrated in the mainstream society. So that's my comment. Thank you very much, sir.
I have a question.
Please go ahead.
My name is Jeff Spencer. I'm a Peace Corps volunteer in North Macedonia, and I'm working with a Roma organization here, and we're working on a project to visit the memorial in Berlin and another, I think, a camp in Belgrade, to teach Roma youth about the Holocaust. So I was very interested in this lecture. I was particularly interested in the note that Jud was discussing about don't confuse Holocaust education with anti-Gypsyism. They're not the same thing. That doesn't accomplish that. But I wasn't clear on the way forward part of the title of this lecture, and I'd like Mr. Nirenberg to discuss that. Looks like Mr. Nirenberg may be gone.
No, no,
No, he's
I'm
here.
right
He's
Oh,
here.
there you are.
I'm right here.
Thank you. So more about what we're actually in the planning phases of that project. And I was hoping to get maybe a little insight on what we should be focusing on as opposed to considering anti-Gypsyism as a goal.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Jeff, by the way, I get my camera back on so that you know I have not left.
Yay.
As mentioned, I'm on the board, or I'm VP of the board of a Roma NGO in Macedonia called the National Roma Centrum, which is based in Kumanovo. And we have over the years more than once had a Peace Corps volunteer in the office. We don't right now. Wish we did. But anyway, I hope you're enjoying your I hope you're enjoying North Macedonia. And my contact info is in the chat box, and I hope we'll be in touch. Where are you embedded? Who are you? What organization are you working for?
I'm in Kratovo, pretty close to Kumanovo. I'm working with our Roma, which is mostly focused on youth. And
Okay.
so, yeah, we're working on a
Yeah,
Holocaust education.
I mean, like I said, I'm not suggesting that the Holocaust history learning and teaching is not useful. The question is what is it useful for? And I think it's very useful for the Roma. I just don't think that the best way to teach Macedonians to stop segregating Roma in the schools or to stop discriminating in the workplace is not to tell them what the Croatians did to the poor Roma in 1940. Because they'll say, well, we're not Croatians, they're the bad guys, we're the good guys, and also we're not in 1940. And also, thanks for telling me that mass murder is wrong. I agree with that. Now, I'm definitely not going to hire any of these people because they're dirty and lazy. But I agree that genocide is bad. So there are things we can achieve, just not that. So I think it's a great project. I think we need more Holocaust education, Samudaripe education, but we need it for us, not for someone else.
It is focused specifically to the Roma,
yeah,
Roma
and
youth.
I think that's great. But I mean, I think the real way forward for Roma, I'll finish my sentence, but before I do, let me say this. I used to work for someone who at the time was on the European level, a big thought leader for Roma, political leader for Roma, Rudko Kawczynski. And Rudko used to love to say that when the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that when it comes to how to solve a multifaceted problem, like how to solve the problems of Roma, everybody thinks the solution has to do with the one tool they have. The Roma musician is going to tell you that the way forward for Roma is more Roma music festivals. Roma have been playing music for non-Roma audiences for thousands of years. But if we could just have a Roma folk music festival next year, that would erase discrimination. If they could just see that we sing and dance well, there'd be no more bigotry. It's the most counter-logical thing you've ever heard, and yet Roma activists say it every day, 365 days a year. Why? If you're a Roma musician, then music seems to be the way to solve the problem. If you're an academic, you think we need more historical research and more writing. Never mind who's actually reading these books. But that's got to be what we need is another symposium or a funded chair somewhere. And if you're a Roma lawyer, then you're going to say that we need court cases and anti-discrimination work. And even though I'm not a lawyer, I happen to actually agree with that one. But anyway, everyone's going to argue that what they do is the way forward because they're not trained to do anything else. And, you know, if you ask an uneducated person who knows how to build a bomb, what the solution is for Northern Ireland, he's going to tell you the provosts have to blow something up in London. Great. If all you know how to do is kill people, then terrorism is going to be the answer. And, you know, so what is the answer? What is the way forward for Roma right now in Europe? It's not one magic silver bullet. We do need history education. We really need legal action. We need to legally address concrete cases of discrimination. We need to force governments and local governments to desegregate schools. That's not done with books. That's done in court. I'd like to think it was done through lobbying, but practically it is not. It is done through European Court of Human Rights verdicts. We need to stop discrimination in the labor market, and unfortunately, that's not done through activism or parades or music festivals. It's done by finding specific employers that have practiced discrimination in hiring or promotion, and taking it on. Roma activists don't want to do that. They don't have people on staff equipped to write that project, let alone carry out that project if it's funded. But that's the way forward. We're not going to end poverty with music festivals. What we can do with music festivals is provide an income for Roma NGO managers so that at least the NGO won't die. And there's nothing wrong with that. Our first goal as a civil rights movement is to have civil rights NGOs that don't die. So if music festivals allow those organizations to pay the rent on the office, to keep the heat on, and to keep someone salaried and coming to work every day, great. As long as they understand that the only reason we're doing the music festivals is to be able to come into work every day and do the real work. Unfortunately, when you're doing music festivals and reporting on how you spent your money to organize the festival, and then putting together a grant proposal for the next music festival, before you know it, you've been a civil rights activist for the last 20 years, and all you've really done is organize music festivals. Again, I'm complaining. It may sound like I'm complaining rather than offering a solution, but what I'm saying is the solution is multifaceted, but it's very easy to get distracted by projects that the donors want, that you know you can get funding for, and before you know it, you're allocating 0% of your time and energy to the only things that really make a difference. We need desegregated schools for Roma in places like Kumanovo or Shutka or wherever. And we need for people to be allowed to walk into a workplace where they're qualified to do the job and apply without their skin color and their ethnicity being counted against them. And much of what we do will never solve that problem. And that's fine as long as it keeps us in the game. And as long as we remember what the real game is.
And it's a long game.
And it's the long game. And that can be very depressing. You know, when I got to Europe in the early 90s, I thought that we were going to fight the battle. And I thought that, you know, within 10 years, the battle would be won. And now we're in a worse place than we were in 30 years ago. Now we're not even sure that we're lobbying for change in democracies. Gee, I mean, when I lived in Hungary, and I thought by now that you know, Roma would be well integrated in Hungary and have a political voice. If you had told me things were going to look worse and not better, I wouldn't have believed you. But if you had told me that Hungary was going to stop being a functioning liberal democracy, well, that would have blown my mind. But here we are. How do you push for human rights in Hungary, which is really an anocracy at this point? It's a pretend democracy. Well, you can't. We can push for equal rights for Roma in North Macedonia, but what are we going to do in Russia? Actually, we just ignore Russia. And when I say we, look at where the money goes. Donors of human rights projects are ignoring Russia. They're not pretending that we can help Roma to politically organize in Moscow. It's not possible because it's not a democracy. But it's certainly possible in the West Balkans.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't see any more hands. So basically, we are almost more than 1.5 hours. So it was a very good presentation and a good exchange of views. And thank you very much, Jude, for giving us a different perspective and a look at way forward, which generally we may be hearing different things, but you gave us try to broaden our perspectives. And thanks for sharing your thoughts, and thanks to everyone for your active participation. And we look forward to your continued participation in our future lectures also. And we will keep you posted of our future activities. And I must say that we also issue a monthly newsletter where we try to cover important news, a brief of the news from Romas across the globe. With this, I'll close the lecture, and thanks everyone for their participation. Have a good evening or a good night to people, depending on which stations we are. And good afternoon to Jude. It is, I think, almost 8 o'clock for him. Have a good breakfast. And thanks once again a lot. Bye bye and thank you.
Thank you, Jude. Thank you, Virendraji.
Thank you all. It's nice meeting you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Jeff, I hope you'll grab my contact information. Maybe we'll speak again.
I already did. Thank you.
Oh,